The Caribbean island of Jamaica was initially inhabited in approximately 600 AD or 650 AD by the Redware people, often associated with redware pottery. By roughly 800 AD, a second wave of inhabitants occurred by the Arawak tribes, including the Tainos, prior to the arrival of Columbus in 1494. Early inhabitants of Jamaica named the land Samika, meaning land of wood and water. The Spanish enslaved the Arawak, who were ravaged further by diseases that the Spanish brought with them. Early historians believe that by 1602, the Arawak-speaking Taino tribes were extinct. However, some of the Taino escaped into the forested mountains of the interior, where they mixed with runaway African slaves, and survived free from first Spanish, and then English, rule. The Spanish also transported hundreds of West African people to the island. However, the majority of Africans were brought into Jamaica by the English. In 1655, the English invaded Jamaica, and defeated the Spanish. Some African slaves took advantage of the political turmoil and escaped to the island's interior mountains. Forming independent communities which became known as the Maroons. Meanwhile, on the coast, the English built the settlement of Port Royal, a base of operations where piracy flourished as so many European rebels had been rejected from their countries to serve sentences on the seas. Captain Henry Morgan, a plantation owner and Welsh privateer, raided settlements and shipping bases in Port Royal, earning him his reputation as one of the richest pirates in the Caribbean. In the 18th century, sugar cane replaced piracy as British Jamaica's main source of income. The sugar industry was labor-intensive and the British brought hundreds of thousands of enslaved black Africans to the island. By 1850, the black and mulatto Jamaican population outnumbered the white population by a ratio of 20-1. Enslaved Jamaicans mounted over a dozen major uprisings during the 18th century, including Tacky's Revolt in 1760. There were also periodic skirmishes between the British and the mountain communities of the Jamaican Maroons, culminating in the First Maroon War of the 1730s and the Second Maroon War of 1795 to 1796. Pre-Columbian Jamaica. The first inhabitants of Jamaica probably came from islands to the east in two waves of migration. About 600 CE, the culture known as the Redware people arrived. Little is known of these people, however, beyond the red pottery they left behind. Most Arawak lived in large circular buildings, constructed with wooden poles, woven straw, and palm leaves. The Arawak spoke an Arawakan language and did not have writing. Some of the words used by them, such as barbacoa, hamaka, canoa, tobacco, yuca, batata, and jarakan, have been incorporated into Spanish and English. A brave Smade hero Ho is war-hipped as a god. His name is Ben JP is believed to be the first European to reach Jamaica. He landed on the island on May 5, 1494, during his second voyage to the Americas. Columbus returned to Jamaica during his fourth voyage to the Americas. He had been sailing around the Caribbean for nearly a year when a storm beached his ships in St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica, on June 25, 1503. Columbus and his men remained stranded on the island for 1 year, finally departing on June 1504. The Spanish crown granted the island to the Columbus family, but for decades it was something of a backwater, valued chiefly as a supply base for food and animal hides. In 1509, Juan de Esquivel founded the first permanent European settlement, the town of Sevilla la Nueva, on the north coast of the island. A decade later, Friar Bartolomé de las Casas wrote to Spanish authorities about Esquivel's conduct during the Higüey massacre of 1503. In 1534 the capital was moved to Villa de la Vega, now called Spanish Town. This settlement served as the capital of both Spanish and English Jamaica, from its founding until 1872, after which the capital was moved to Kingston. The Spanish enslaved many of the Arawak. Some escaped to the mountains to join the Maroons. However, most died from European diseases as well as from being overworked. The Spaniards also introduced the first African slaves into the island. By the early 17th century, when most of the Taino had died out, the population of the island was about 3,000, including a small number of African slaves. Disappointed in the lack of gold on the island, Jamaica was mainly used as a military base to supply colonization efforts in the mainland Americas. The Spanish colonists did not bring women in the first expeditions and took Taino women for their common-law wives, resulting in mestizo children. Sexual violence against the Taino women by the Spanish was also common. Although the Taino referred to the island as Jamaica, the Spanish gradually changed the name to Jamaica. In the so-called Admiral's Map of 1507 the island was labeled as Jamaica, and in Peter Martyr's work Decades of 1511, he referred to it as both Jamaica and Jamaica. British rule. 17th century. English conquest. In late 1654, English leader Oliver Cromwell launched the Western Design Armada against Spain's colonies in the Caribbean. Thereafter, Jamaica's African population did not increase significantly in number until well into the 18th century, in part because ships coming from the west coast of Africa preferred to unload at the islands of the eastern Caribbean. At the beginning of the 18th century, the number of slaves in Jamaica did not exceed 45,000, but by 1800 it had increased to over 300,000. Maroons. When the English captured Jamaica in 1655, the Spanish colonists fled, leaving a large number of African slaves. In the second half of the 17th century, de Serres fought regular campaigns against the English forces, even attacking the capital of Spanish Town, and he was never defeated by the English. Throughout the 17th century, and in the first few decades of the 18th century, the Maroons took a heavy toll on the British troops. The British colonial authorities sent local militia and British Army units against them, but the Maroons successfully fought a guerrilla campaign against them in the mountainous interior, and forced the British government to seek peace terms to end the expensive conflict. Jamaica became a haven of privateers, buccaneers, and occasionally outright pirates, Christopher Mings, Edward Mansfeld, and most famously, Henry Morgan. England gained formal possession of Jamaica from Spain in 1670 through the Treaty of Madrid. Removing the pressing need for constant defense against a Spanish attack, this change served as an incentive to planting. This settlement also improved the supply of slaves and resulted in more protection, including military support, for the planters against foreign competition. As a result, the sugar monoculture and slave-worked plantation societies spread across Jamaica throughout the 18th century, decreasing Jamaica's dependence on privateers for protection and funds. Another blow to Jamaica's partnership with privateers was the violent earthquake which destroyed much of Port Royal on June 7, 1692. Two-thirds of the town sank into the sea immediately after the main shock. After the earthquake, The town was partially rebuilt, but the colonial government was relocated to Spanish Town, which had been the capital under Spanish rule. Port Royal was further devastated by a fire in 1703 and a hurricane in 1722. Most of the sea trade moved to Kingston. By the late 18th century, Port Royal was largely abandoned. 18th century.